So this is the first video in our online course, and I'm going to show you how to make a piece of felt. I know some people will have already made felt, but there are as many different ways of making felt as there are people who make felt, so I thought I'd show you my way, which I've picked up over the years. So we start with some lovely merino wool tops. This is lovely and new, and it's lovely and soft as well. And I'm laying it out on a piece of thin polythene. Now, I did have an email from an American student who said, "What's polythene?" So I'm afraid I don't know what polythene's called in America or even Australia, but this is it. I'm sure you all see it every day, really. It's on a towel, just an old towel. I happen to have hundreds of old towels because I did a workshop one day in a college where I told the students to bring old towels, and at the end of the lesson they couldn't be bothered to take them home, so they threw them all in the bin. So I pulled them all out and washed them, and now I have plenty of old felting towels. So we're going to start by laying the wool out in very small little sections. So you can pull it apart and just get hold of the end of it and just pull a piece away like this. Now it's a nice fine little piece. It's much better to work with small thin pieces than to try and put a great fat lump down all at once. So we're going to lay a whole row of little thin pieces, just slightly overlapping one another, and we're not doing any curling or moving or anything. For your first piece, I think just do a small area. So that's your first row, and then we're going to do another row next to it. Just continue like this until you've got a rectangle-ish piece, and then I think we'll do 3 rows here. This piece of felt that I'm making I'm going to use to make brooches from later, so I'm just using this opportunity to get a piece made. So it's as good a way as any, really, to introduce you to felt making. Now that's fairly even. Actually, I should have used a coloured towel, and you would have been able to see, wouldn't you, if there are any holes in it anywhere. Try and keep it even as you can. Now we're going to do another layer on top in the other direction. So again, just gently pulling and laying it down in the opposite direction. You could, if you wanted, turn the whole thing with the polythene round in the other way instead of having to go sideways. If you find it easier, I'll do that, and then you can see what I mean. So I've turned it round, and I can still continue to pull like this. So again, we have 3 rows, a bit like roof tiles, I suppose, but you have to start at the top and you work your way down to the bottom. I think if you did roof tiles like that, you'd end up with a leaky roof. So it's just a metaphor. There we go. And finally, the bottom row again. I'm going a little bit more quickly than I would do normally because it's not a very good spectator sport, is it? Just kind of shape it a little bit into a rectangle, and now we need a 3rd layer on the top. So I've turned it round again, and I can do another layer. This is a lovely colour. I think it's silver grey from Wingham Wool Works. This is a lovely new bit of wool, so it's very easy to pull apart, and it's very lovely and light and fluffy. As your wool gets older and you handle it more, it starts to mat together. You'll see when I get my other colours out that in a minute to add to the top of this what I mean. But presumably you will have all got nice new wool for your new felting course, or at least you'll have, if you're learning to felt, you won't have done a lot in the past. Right, so I'm going to put that away now, because I've finished with that grey. And the one thing you need to make sure is that you don't get your dry wool wet. So I'm just going to put that down on the floor. And you can see now that you've got a little rectangle on, oh, it's a little bit to one side, but it doesn't matter, on your cellophane. Now I'm going to use these bits of older wool. You can see what I mean. This is what I mean by the, I don't know if you can hear that, it's quite hard to pull apart. Now I'm going to make a graded, shaded piece because I want to make brooches from this, and when I make brooches I like to do it with a few different colours. So I'm just going to add a few wisps of other colours to this wool. Now on your first piece, because it's sort of experimental, you could try all sorts of things. You could make little circles from wool and lay those down. I don't really want that on this, but oh, actually I will do, and then you can see what it'll look like. Because when you've done this, this will be a nice piece that you can use to practice on before you start stitching on your main pieces. This is a bit heavy-handed, this dark red, but I just want a few wisps, little wisps of colour. And I'm making it sort of vaguely leaf shape because I'm going to make some brooches from it. And one thing you don't want is great, well, it needs to go the way that the brooches are going to go, really, because otherwise you end up with just one bit of one colour and it won't look right. I made some felt a bit like this last week and I've used it all up. So now here's a little bit of khaki. So I'm just trying to make some more because I really like the brooches that I made from it. Of course we aren't making brooches in this course, it's just felt for stitching on later. So I'm just making some little wispy bits. It's very hard to explain that these little bits of other colours, when you lay them down, they look so different when you've felted them together. We'll have for our next lesson video, we'll have a bit where I talk more about the colours and things, and so you can do a more controlled bit of felting and try and think about the colours that you want to use in your projects. But just for the moment, just play and see what you can do and get yourself a nice little bit of felt. I'm not so sure I like these colours now, but if I overlap them, this is a bit of, I think it's called Air Force Blue. This is some of my old wool that's quite hard to tease apart. So I might just develop this little circle here. You can do crisscrosses and cut bits off with scissors just to get some little speckledy areas if you like. Have a little play. Anyway, the main thrust of today is to actually learn how to roll and rub, and that's got a little bit of a foreign body in it. I think I might leave it. I think it's just a bit of other wool. You don't want to put really thick pieces on because they tend to felt to themselves rather than to the background wool. Right, that's enough now, I think. So those are all my little sticky on bits. I'm going to put them down on the floor out of the way for now. And I'm going to start rolling this piece of wool. Now then, we need to wet it. Now, there are hundreds of ways of wetting it. You can use a bottle that the top's been drilled with holes, or when I say drilled, actually what I've used is a hot skewer and gone through it, but don't breathe the fumes in, will you? And then you can just sprinkle. And the same with even just an old milk bottle, but the only thing about milk bottles is that with a lot of, this has been used by a class of students, so they've all squeezed it, and it's got little holes in the bottom as well as the top, which are no good at all. Or you could just dip a sponge into the water and put the water on top, but best of all, and you don't have to have one of these, but because I'm a geeky felter, I've got one. And it's a bulb, it's a felter's bulb. I hope you can see it. And you just put it into the water, pick up the water, and then it squeezes out. But before you do that, you need to put some kind of barrier on here between the wool and you're rubbing the soap. So I use this mesh, and this is the kind of mesh that you make screen doors from, I think, in America. I don't know, in Australia we don't really seem to need things like that here. In England it's sold as pond mesh. It's a good mesh because it's quite firm and it's plastic and it lasts a long time really. If you haven't got anything like that, you could just use something like this just horrible nylon-y net curtain material. You could cut a piece off that and use it. It's just something that you can put over the top to hold your wool, your fibres in place while you're soaping them, that won't really attach itself to the wool. So the next thing I'm going to do is wet it now, as I said. So I'm going to put some water in my bulb and squirt it on here. And what you might notice here is that the water tends to sit in little droplets on the surface. And that's where the soap comes in, because the soap gets rid of those blobs. It destroys the surface tension of the little blobs of water. So you need to get some soap on it, and it helps the water to penetrate the fibres. Now this is it's the end of a huge piece of olive oil soap that I bought ages ago, and it looks horrible, but it is really nice, and at the end your hands will feel lovely and soft. And I'm just going to rub the surface of the wool with the surface of the mesh with soap, so that you can, well, you don't want too much. If you get it too frothy, it acts a bit like conditioner and it prevents the fibres from matting together, because that's what you're after now. You want these fibres to mat together. Now, a little word about soap. You can really use any kind of soap, but I had a bit of a bad experience using washing up liquid detergent. Well, actually, for one thing, you get loads and loads of bubbles if you do that, and you don't want bubbles everywhere. Also, it dried out the oils from my hands and it made them very sore, and I ended up having to cut my wedding ring off, so I've never used that since. So any kind of vegetable soap is the best, really. Right, now that's completely soaked and soaped. You can peel the top off now. So gently peel away the fibres from the top of from the underside of the mesh, and take the mesh off. You can see now that all the fibres are wet down. Now, what we need to do is we need to check that the back's wet enough. So I'm just going to fold it up like this and have a look on the back. And when I can see, can you see certain areas where the back hasn't got wet at all? So I'm going to wet it a little bit more now. You can see that the water hasn't penetrated through. I'll just put a little bit more water on. Some more of the, sorry, the water will penetrate when you roll as well. Now we need to start the rolling. Now on this piece here you can see we've got some wispy edges. I really hope you can see this. Got some wispy edges down here, and perhaps I don't want wispy edges, so I'm going to make them into a rectangle. But if you want wispy edges, that's absolutely fine. So to eliminate wispy edges, when you fold it up, just fold it, when you start to roll rather, just fold over like that and squash them down, and the wet will make them stick to themselves again. Oops. There we go. So you've got a nice straight edge there. The reason I'm doing it is because I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to use this to make some brooches, and because it was wispy, it meant that a large area of it would be too thin for brooches. So I'm just folding it around there to get it nice and straight. There we are. Right, so I'm going to start rolling it. It's a bit dry at this edge, I've just noticed. I'm just going to add a little bit more water there. Just gently. Now this is where the hard work begins. So You fold the edge of your polythene, or whatever you call it where you live, fold it up, and I hope you can see all this and I haven't got my camera at the wrong angle, and I'm rolling it tightly up into a nice little tube. Now it's got long ends, it's sometimes a little bit better to get something the same size as your work, but we'll just try it like this for now. And now you're just going to set up a rolling motion. I'm not pressing, I'm just gently rolling, letting it carry itself really. Lots and lots of time. Probably 200 in each direction overall, or maybe even more. But we'll talk about that in a minute. You'd think it would be good exercise for your arms, but there's a good reason mine are covered up. So after I've just rolled it a few times there, probably about 30 or something, I'm just going to unroll it to show how it's now beginning to blend together. Can you see that? I can actually pick it up now in one piece, and I'm going to turn it on its front, because I think sometimes when you've got patterns on the front they stay together better if you have them underneath and you roll them in the other direction. I might also turn it round. I haven't got quite as much flapping out at the sides for rolling. So it's still a little bit dry there, but it will wet, I think. It's pretty wet is this piece, so we keep rolling. But I have turned it round now. Now if you want to, you could add a little bit of tape to your roll, just so that it doesn't keep unrolling. Sticky tape, we call this masking tape. I don't know what you call it where you live. Oh, now I can't remember. I think I have to make it longer and join. Oh, never mind. So now I'm doing it in earnest, and I hope that you can see what I'm doing. Maybe if I turn the video camera around a little bit. Oops. And it does keep unravelling, I'm afraid, unrolling. So turn it round the other way. You have to, if you keep doing it in one direction, it'll shrink. So you have to keep it even. You need to, I think I'm going to turn the sides in. To keep it even, you need to keep turning it round and doing it in opposite directions so that you get a good even shrinkage, really. That's what we're aiming for. I forgot to tell you that that water in that bucket, that bowl, is quite hot. It doesn't have to be boiling hot, but the warmer the better. Now, I'm going to do this properly this time. If you want to add tape, of course the tape won't stick to the wet polythene, so you need to stick it to itself like that. Now I got everybody quiet for this video, and I can hear the cat outside the bedroom door meowing to come in. So I'm afraid he's going to have to stay out there. It's funny, but as soon as I get into my sewing room, I can spend the whole day downstairs and messing about in the rest of the house, wasting time on the internet. But as soon as my bottom touches my sewing chair, the phone will ring. It is inevitable. But it's nice to have friends who care enough to ring, and who you are obviously telepathetic with. So, this is a good hefty rolling. I don't know if you want to watch all this. I suppose I could cut some of it out, couldn't I? But maybe for your first video you ought to be able to watch it all. So you can see now that it's shrunk that way. So if I want to keep that absolutely rectangular. It doesn't really matter for this, but if you've done some nice designs on the other side, you want to keep them, they call it constraining, don't they, when you edit photographs and crop them on computer programs. If you want to constrain the proportions, you have to keep turning it round. Roll it up again. I'm going to roll it right to the end of the polythene. I used to use bubble wrap. I hope you all know what bubble wrap is. Pop cap or something. Pop. I haven't got any just around me at the moment. And then somebody explained that it's better just to use a thin polythene because all your energy is going into the wool rather than into the empty air holes. So we're getting there now. It's starting to bind together. And I mean, you can lift it up now. You can even sort of pull it apart a little bit if you want to. But I will keep going with this because, as I say, I want it to be fairly firm and quite thick. So I'm going to switch the video off now for a few minutes, but it'll only be a second for you. Right, I've rolled it quite a lot more now, and it's shrunk considerably, and it's quite firm. And I could carry on rolling it in the same way, but to speed things up, I'm going to show you an alternative way towards the end that you can roll your felt up. And this is using a bamboo mat. Once upon a time these were quite hard to get, but they're fairly readily available now. And the friction of the rods against the wool helps it to shrink a lot more. The only thing about it is you have to be very careful because these little string joins sometimes bind to the wool, so you can't do it for more than, say, about 50 rolls. When I switched the video off, I rolled it about another 80 times perhaps in the polythene, so I wasn't sitting doing nothing. And then you turn it round again. Just keep going with it, really. Now you can see it's gone into a bit of an odd shape. I'll show you in a minute. And if you happen to want to keep yours as a square, what you can do is pull these corners, and the bits that have sort of gone inwards, you can pull those out, and the fat bits you can rub against the. I'll turn it the other way around so you can see. You can rub it against the bamboo mat, and that helps to shrink it inwards a bit. You see, if your corners come out into a sort of point, it isn't very attractive and you know, if you were making a nice piece that you wanted to be a rectangle, you wouldn't want to have to cut the corners into a rectangle because that wouldn't go with the rest of it. It would be too sharp, but you can roll it inwards. I also have a little. Is it? Oh, here it is. I bought this once in a cheap shop. It's a sort of chopping board, so you could use that if you something like that if you wanted to rub it. It's like a washboard, really, I suppose. And that's another way of adding friction and getting it shrunk, and you have a bit more control because you can use your fingertips on the bits that you want to actually shrink up a bit more. Oh, it's got into a rather bizarre shape here, but never mind, we'll work on it. The reason it goes into these funny shapes is that thicker areas of wool shrink at a different rate than thin areas. I couldn't tell you which, but anyway, just a lesson to you to keep it nice and even. I hope you can see all this. It's extremely dull outside. And unfortunately I'm in a right-hand light, so it makes it a bit difficult to see the colours. Now then, oh, it's gone a bit long and thin, so I'm going to go that way with it. Or I could put it into the bamboo mat and roll it that way a little bit more. You can see it's really, I could pull it and pull it now and it probably wouldn't pull apart, and that's a good test for when your felt's done. I'll just do it a little bit more because I want it really firm. And don't forget at the moment that it doesn't look as nice as it will because it's still wet and the colours look darker. It's much better when they're dry and they've lightened up a bit. So you can see you've got, unfortunately, you've got ridges where the bamboo mat has imprinted itself. If it's really bad, there's a really bad little corner here. I'm just going to snip that off, and this one. I'm not neurotic about having a rectangle, but I'm just giving you the information so that you can do that. Oops. I think I'll roll it that way because it seems to have shrunk inwards, and I'd like it to be more square, I think. Oh, it's just dawned on me that the camera will be moving as I'm bouncing the table around. So I apologise for the blurredness. I have to be a bit more careful. I hope you can understand everything that I'm showing you. Of course, this is only the first one, so you're very welcome to email me if you have any difficulties with understanding. Now, that really, I would suggest, is a good piece of felt, suitable for making brooches and suitable for stitching on. Now, some people at this point would go to the sink and screw their felt up like this and hurl it at the sink, and that really makes it, shocks it so that the fibres cling together. I'll use the board, it might be a bit like the sink. I often do this. I expect I'm spraying water on the camera lens now. I have to be careful about that. I feel it. And there you have a nice bit of felt. You would have to rinse it, of course, now, because you need to get the soap out, and then dry it. Now, whatever you do, don't put it in a tumble dryer because that will shrink it further and it'll become like cardboard. So unless you can put it in for sort of 30 seconds at a time and keep taking it out, it's not a good way to dry it. I find the best way, really, I hang it over a radiator. It's the only way. The worst days to make felt are days in the summer when it's too warm to have the radiators on and it's very damp. So today's a good day because it's quite chilly and we'll have the radiators on. Now, let's pretend I've rinsed it, and I'm going to squeeze out the excess water as well. And you might even see a change in colour when I do that. So there we have the first piece of felt, and here endeth the first lesson. If you have any questions, please get in touch.